On May the 9th, the Dead by Daylight anniversary livestream took place at PAX East in Boston, showing off bits of the Five Nights at Freddy's licensed chapter among many other things. Everyone's chattering about Springtrap and The Walking Dead, and losing their minds for better or worse about what Year 10 is bringing to the game. But as Dead by Daylight's 9th year is wrapping up, now seems like a great time to look back on the past year that we've just had. It's definitely been a year of all time, but whether you think it's been a good or a bad one will depend entirely on what you prioritise and what you get out of the game. For a lot of people, this has been one of the best years the game has ever had, but for many others, it's the reason they're playing less than ever. I'm going to try and do my best to present a balanced viewpoint here that can appreciate both, but at the end of the day, this list will be informed by my own opinions and my own perspective. It's my list, after all. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, to Dead by Daylight Year 9. The best and the worst.
A dull boy. Oh, Dash and no law makes Will a dull boy.
This is not really a great rework. It removes her identity as a trap-based killer.
Make it stop. Oh, Dash and no law makes Will a dull boy.
Mechanically, he feels very much like Wesker. He has dashes.
Makes Will a dull boy. Make it stop.
We'll be entering the entity's trials as a cool new legendary outfit for the Trapper.
Oh, Dash and no law makes Will a dull boy. Makes Will a dull boy.
Dear God, what was that? Anyway, I'm sure it was nothing. Foreshadowing is a narrative Let's start off with something great. In fact, let's start off with one of the greatest somethings you've had delivered from John Behaviour this year. Because the massive influx of new players coming in the FNAF chapter has prompted Behaviour to take action on game health and quality of life. And damn did we bloody need it. It's been a bit of an open secret for quite some time now that Dead by Daylight has just kind of been slowly burning itself down from the inside for ages now. And many of the game's most frustrating sticking points were starting to seriously grate with established players and hurt the new player experience too. The commitment to quality of life changes and game health improvements was long overdue, and they've come from so many angles. The surrender system, increased survivor blood point gain, improving the visibility of deep wounds, so many little things that make every game you play just that bit better, and that will age well as the years go on. And there's plenty more to come, like giving up prevention, bulk BP spending, map offering adjustments, and custom game improvements. The long-standing problems these systems are targeting ground players down and harm player retention long term, and Behaviour taking some time to fix these long-standing grating points will pay dividends. It's worth admitting that some of these quality of life things are a bit concerning, and a few have already had some grating points of their own. Most notably the questionable new quest system that replaces the tomes and dailies, players using the abandoned feature to give 3-gen gameplay a proper win condition now, and adding even more anti-slug, anti-camp and anti-tunnel to a game already stuffed with it. The prospect of these sorts of things is a little bit scary, I won't lie.
They thought of it.
But this is broadly the right direction. And most of the scary stuff is either being actively fixed right now, like the quests, or we haven't seen it yet, so it's hard to properly judge the impact that it's going to have going forwards. But before I evolve into the negative Nancy that everyone always seems to already think I am, all the time, I want to address the other biggest improvement the game has had this year. And just like the game health stuff, it's the kind of feature that will set DBD up well for the future. Game modifiers and the split queue system. DBD is at a size now where unless there's some major upset somewhere, splitting the queues between an event or modified queue and the regular match queue tends to go at least alright. And splitting the queues has allowed DBD to take huge steps forwards in how they design events and modifiers that transform the game more fundamentally. Alternative game modes like Chaos Shuffle, Lights Out, and especially 2v8 have freshened up the standard DBD gameplay loop for huge numbers of players, but they couldn't have existed without splitting the queues. Imagine telling every single player that they just weren't allowed to pick their own builds ever for like 3 weeks, or telling everybody who doesn't like Trapper, Huntress, Billy, Wraith or Nurse to go fuck themselves for a month, because the only playable mode was the first round of 2v8 with its 15-minute killer queues. DBD's core gameplay cannot innovate without split queues, and without the innovation and fresh gameplay of modes like 2v8 and the event modes, I guarantee a lot of players would have felt much worse about the past year of DBD. Not to mention that splitting the queues helps an event with extensive gameplay changes inevitably cause part of this game's house of cards of code to collapse somewhere. Does anybody else here remember the 2024 Bone Chill event, where Houndmaster's movement speed was bugged so she had to get kill switched only a week after her release? A day after she got 2 rounds of hotfix buffs? That was a problem caused by the event snowmen, and if we hadn't split the queues, they'd have had to kill switch her in the main and only playable mode, and the brand new killer they just buffed to make her more viable would have been completely unplayable during the month of her release, while I waited for behaviour to come back from their Christmas break. But thanks to split queues, they could just kill switch her in the event mode only, and let people keep playing her in the regular mode if they wanted. Hell, that even had a nice side effect where Houndmaster was really common in the regular queues, so if you wanted to match against a new killer, you could pretty reliably find one by just not queuing for the event mode, because everybody else was playing the event mode. The main game acting as a fallback option bailed us out in the Blood Moon event too, where a bunch of killer powers and perks just stopped working overnight because of blood generators, and in the Halloween event where Twins and Knight just stopped being killers with functional powers for a few weeks because of the unstable rifts. Split queues have allowed DBD to experiment, to innovate and try some crazy shit that players have been demanding while maintaining the option for players to enjoy the regular game if whatever seasonal dish behaviour's cooked up doesn't quite wet their whistle. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what other harebrained shit they've got cooking for year 10. But on the topic of big seismic shifts that have shaken DBD to its core, I'm afraid it's not all been sunshine and rainbows. Not that long ago, Dead by Daylight lost something it can't get back easily. One of the game's most complex and skill-expressive powers that they've ever made. A true icon of horror, and the dream license of many behaviour developers, and unlike Stranger Things, we're probably not getting this one back anytime soon. Rest in peace, Pinhead. We're missing you already. If you've been around in the community as long as I have, behaviour losing the Hellraiser license really shouldn't have been surprising to anyone. We never had any cosmetics for the Cenobite after his release, the NFT fiasco overshadowed the release with messy controversies, and the rights to the Hellraiser license changed hands not long after the chapter came out. Park Avenue Entertainment lost the rights to the original Hellbound Heart author Clive Barker, and as soon as that happened, the rights to the license in DBD were kind of living on borrowed time. But that doesn't make Pinhead's departure from the fog any less bitter. In my opinion, the Cenobite has one of the best design and skill-expressive powers in the game, which is impressive given that sky-high ceiling doesn't correlate to a killer who becomes too overbearing to go against once you know how he works. He's quite well balanced and more or less always has been, barring a questionable add-on or two. And technically, he was a huge step forward for killer power design that paved the way for the new standard of killers today. Passive slowdown through temporary items was a mechanic that NEMESIS introduced, but that Pinhead made more central to the power, and that got reintegrated into killers like Sadako, Singularity, and Xenomorph. While on the artistic side, his effort-free, non-physical animations, and voice lined by the main man himself, Doug Bradley, brought the character to life incredibly authentically. We take fully voiced killers with smooth and unique animations like Vecna, Dracula, or Chucky for granted, but Pinhead was a milestone that set the bar for the quality of killer releases going forwards. But because of the rights exchange, his absence will almost certainly be permanent, and that may even mitigate behaviour's desire to balance the killer in the future should he need some tuning. It could definitely be worse. His teachables are some of the best in the game, and so all of them becoming general perks is probably great for brand new killer players, and it wasn't like there was a Hellraiser map we would lose with the license either, but any new or returning players who happen to have not picked the killer up will be missing out on one of Dead by Daylight's most fun and interesting killers. For likely the rest of this game's lifetime, Pinhead players will be a dying breed. And that's a real shame. Here's to you, old boy. Hope Leviathan serves champagne in hell. You've done some great work, and should Clive Barker change his mind, there'll always be a spot for you here by the campfire. But sadly, Pinhead isn't the only loss of Dead by Daylight Year 9 that we'll be feeling for a long time to come. We've lost more than a license this year. In June last year, just as the new year hit, Behaviour laid off 95 employees, and a few months after, Midwich Entertainment, a studio Behaviour bought a few years ago, was shut down along with Project T, the Dead by Daylight spin-off game that Behaviour had bought the studio with the intention to work on. Obviously, layoffs are not unusual in the gaming industry, especially not in recent years. During and immediately after COVID, a lot of game studios took on a lot of new staff that they ultimately couldn't afford to keep. They anticipated further growth that just didn't come to pass, and that resulted in layoffs across the industry. Behaviour wasn't the worst nor the first of them, But that doesn't mean that 95 people losing their jobs is suddenly acceptable. It's the result of chronic mismanagement, and I've heard nothing about whether or not the managers behind those decisions to overhire were part of the cohort laid off. If they weren't, they should have been. It's rough, but sadly not uncommon among modern studios. But what is uncommon is buying a game studio with the intention of making a new spin-off game, only to cease production of the game and shutter the studio they just bought, seemingly out of the blue. For those who don't know, Midwinter Entertainment was a studio bought by Behaviour in 2022 with the objective of making Project T, a Left 4 Dead style multiplayer shooter set in the Entity's realm, but outside the trials themselves. This is the kind of stuff we were seeing in the Observer sections of the Times. Windows into the wider world of Dead by Daylight, and Project T promised to open those windows further and give us a nice tour of this world in a whole new way. But the Midwinter closure shut that idea down completely, while Project T was still in the very early stages with the game only playable in network and alpha tests. The details around why Midwinter got closed and why Project T got cancelled are a little fuzzy, with Behaviour providing the following statement.
Yesterday, Behaviour Interactive announced the cancellation of Project T and the closure of its Midwinter studio in Seattle. This decision was taken following a diligent risk assessment from a commercial and a product perspective, which yielded unsatisfactory results. This sad news in no way reflects the talent of the team, who put a lot of energy into Project T. All the employees were offered to relocate to our Canadian studios, as we strongly believe in their expertise. Should they decide not to accept, they will be presented with a generous severance package. We want to thank them for all their hard work on Project T and wish them the very best for the future.
A commercial and product perspective. Is it just me who thinks that's really unhelpfully vague? But what we do know is that for the insiders who got to give it a go, Project T was actually a very good game in the making. It was exciting and fun and opened up a new window into the world of Dead by Daylight. And we know this now because a week or so ago, an insider who played the game reached out to me.
I was one of the few that joined the Behavior Insider team, got selected to preview the development of Project T, and even got selected for the first and only alpha test. It was incredibly fun, agreed upon by the overwhelming majority of playtesters, firing everyone up to post tons and tons of feedback and ideas. But besides the loss of a great multiplayer Left 4 Dead-like, we quietly lost what was probably the greatest look into the DBD universe, alongside phenomenal characters as well. But it died quietly, canned just a month after the team finished collecting playtest feedback. Likely canned by an executive who didn't get the return on investment that they wanted to see immediately following the release of Frank Stone, because these events happened very close together. And it all happened so quietly, nobody said anything because almost nobody knew and fewer probably cared. I now genuinely wish I had actually recorded the precious couple hours I got with the game. My hope is that you see this and understand what we lost and how pathetic Behavior's lore vectors are in comparison. What is this place? How did the trespassers get here? How do they avoid the notice of the entity? Who are the Thrall and why are they here? Why are there vehicles and gas and guns and machines and facilities? Who is the Ringmaster and Keaton? Imagine Left 4 Dead-like campaign missions. Imagine in-game events where you could run into a killer as a Halloween boss battle and learn more about them in the present while outside of the trials. But no, a studio was bought, worked for a year and a half on a super fun experience, and we lose the biggest window into DBD that we could have ever had.
In case there's any doubt here, my source isn't a Behaviour or Midwinter employee at all. They were just an insider and alpha playtester on the program. But hopefully their testament paints a picture of what we almost got and what we lost this year. I hope the Midwinter developers are doing great things now, whether they're working at Behaviour or went off and did their own thing. But that doesn't help the fact that the work they did on this game will forever go uncredited. We will never get to play what they put almost 2 years of work into. In my opinion, Project T's closure is the most important failure of DBD Year 9, because it shows that somewhere along the line, Behaviour's multi-studio management is rough. And that should ring alarm bells, given that they're still buying out smaller studios, most recently Red Hook, the makers of Darkest Dungeon. Hopefully, Behaviour have learned from their mistakes. But enough for now about the stuff that we almost got or that we lost this year, because despite all of that, Dead by Daylight still got a shit ton of stuff throughout Year 9. Let's start with the obvious and take a look at the chapters and new characters that we got this year. Dead by Daylight Year 9 brought us 6 major content drops. We started out with a Dungeons & Dragons chapter with Vecna and the Troop, followed by the Tomb Raider release with Lara Croft, the Castlevania chapter with Dracula and Trevor Belmont, the Doomed Course chapter with the Houndmaster and Tori Kane, the Tokyo Ghoul release with Ken Kaneki, and most recently the Steady Pulse release with Aurella Rose. All these chapters have their fans and their detractors, because nothing in this game's community is uncontroversial ever at any point in human history. So let's start out with what I consider the best chapter of DBD's Year 9. I fucking loved Doomed Course. You guys know me. I love DBD's cast of original characters. Cannot get enough of them, especially in the current era of DBD, dominated by licensed content. And Doomed Course provided exactly what I spent the past couple of years hankering for. Portia May and Tori Kane both tell super satisfying stories exploring areas we've never really been to before in DBD history. Tori especially is a standout as we get a window into the life of the Black Veil cult members and a proper exploration of a morally ambiguous and guilty survivor for the first time since, the war criminal. Meanwhile, Portia is a tale of bloody vengeance on the high seas, a Shakespearean tragedy with a cane corso. She's a bombastic and charismatic character brought to life by the amazing voice work of Deborah Wilson. And her power is cool too. Now that they've tuned the balance pretty much perfectly, she's fun to play and play against. Has a very well defined skill floor and learning curve so you can feel yourself getting better at the character over time. And she's more than powerful enough to justify any time you spend really learning the killer. There's even some pretty okay perks here. Jagged Compass rocks as an enabler for the non-pain rare Scourge hooks, Clean Break is basically a syringe if it was properly balanced, and we don't even need to talk about how much of a game changer Shoulder the Burden is. Yes, the perk is significantly overtuned, but it adds a lot of depth to Survivor macro play, and I'd still run it in all my builds even if they nerfed the shit out of it, because it's just a lot of fun to use. Aside from Shoulder being, Shoulder, the only real issue the chapter had was the bugs, which I don't hold against Doomed Course specifically because of reasons we'll get into later. Coming in at number 2, we have a tie between both the solo survivors of Year 9, Lara Croft and Aurella Rose. Behaviour tends to cook with the solo survivor releases. I said Alan Wake and Nick Cage were the standout releases of DBD's last year of content in my review of Year 8, and I stand by that. Alan Wake especially. And while I don't think that Lara and Aurella are quite as good as those two, mostly because I don't think the voice lines are written quite as well, both of them are broadly excellent releases that enrich the roster in their own ways. Aurella provides some much needed transgender representation in Dead by Daylight's cast, and she's brought to life with sensitivity, earnestness, and maturity. She's very well rounded and very realistic, providing a benchmark for a well written new survivor that I think will be a good metric to judge future survivors on. And Lara is just playing to the judge here. Lara Croft is probably the most important female character and one of the most important characters in gaming history, and has been a favourite character of mine since I was old enough to hold a controller. There's no way I was going to dislike this release at all. Of course, she's still pretty well integrated. DBD's lore picked her up at just the right time and brought her 2013 look to life brilliantly. And she launched with a ton of cosmetics from throughout the Survivor trilogy, so you can rep your favourite installment, or just dress her up in the winter parka and snow boots so she doesn't get chilly during the Winter Snowmen event like I did. Despite not exactly coming from a horror series, Lara slots into the world of the entity like she was made for it. And before you ask, yes, I am very, very happy she's getting the unified Lara skin in August. It looks gorgeous. And if you want my guess what the second outfit is going to be from that release, either the Tactical Adventurer garb from Rise of the Tomb Raider, or the Blue Heron or Serpent God outfit from Shadow. Whatever it is, I'm probably still buying it anyway, just so I can have the full collection. At number 3, we have the biggest stride DBD has taken to date away from horror, and that's the Dungeons & Dragons chapter. The idea of a D&D chapter raised some eyebrows. As a non-horror property, it would have a hell of an uphill battle to fit into the tone and atmosphere of the fog in a way that wouldn't feel out of place alongside classics of horror like Halloween and Alien. But for the most part, I would say it rose to this challenge admirably, especially with the implementation of its killer Vecna. Condensing the Undying King himself, BBEG of 1,000 campaigns, into a game like DBD was hard, but with the help of his own special spell wheel, an exhaustive magic item system, and a wonderful voice performance by Matthew Mercer, he feels like a complete package. His lore rocks too, for a licensed character at least. He's definitely integrated into the fog with more care than your average licensed character, with the implications that the Black Veil even exists in the D&D universe. It's a lovely touch that makes Vecna feel right at home in the fog. The bards are a bit weirder. Their lore's a bit patchy and they kind of strain DBD's tone a bit, but they're charismatic and fun, and Astri, born to be Butch Yazar, laid a benchmark as our first fully non-human survivor and the first female survivor to use the male animation skeleton. She's cool, we love Astri around here. Now, I just wish Bearmar was more interesting. The perks and visual design of the map were all home runs as well. The map is an absolute treat to explore, and Weave Attunement and Bardic Inspiration especially straddle the line between being powerful, fun to use, and not breaking the game once Weave got nerfed. Aside from some minor stuff with the bards, the only real issue, and this is a big one though, is Forgotten Ruins, at least on the gameplay side. Yes, it's very pretty and atmospheric, but it's also one of the game's most unhealthy maps. The portals create near infinites that neuter several killer powers completely, but it's also the best map in the entire game to camp on because the main building is effectively a giant basement with a 3-gen in it. The map is a total mess, and I kinda hope they never use the portal mechanic again if it has to act like this, because it is just a shit show, frankly. Speaking of shit shows, we have our number 4. Everyone's problematic fave, Ken Kaneki, the Tokyo Ghoul. This will be the most controversial thing I say in this video for sure, because as I type these words, I can hear a bunch of people adjusting their fedoras and unsheathing their katanas at me for not putting it at number 1, and a bunch of players sick and tired of their 14th Kaneki match in a row, seeing friends to their notifications in their nightmares, will be surprised that I think something's actually worse than this. I think there's quite a few things the chapter did well, and quite a few it really cocked up. I love the way that Kaneki was translated from the anime art style into DVD's 3D modelling and animation, and his perks will have their uses too. Forever Entwined especially, being a feel-good perk to slap onto high-tier killers, is something that I'm seeing a lot lately. But it's kind of hard to argue the steamroller effect Kaneki's inclusion has had on the game now that he's here, because never before has Behaviour released a killer who's so fun to play, such a huge number of killer players, while being such a ball ache for survivors to deal with. If you're a killer player, you'll remember how much queue times took the absolute piss in the weeks following Kaneki's release. And if you're a survivor player, you'll probably remember why. Between Enraged being basically permanent, getting injured and enraged through walls and round corners, and the ability to tunnel off Hook from 70 meters away by following on notifications around like a lost puppy, if you weren't giving up on Hook against him, odds are somebody on your team was. He's been nerfed pretty significantly since then, but a lot of the complaints and frustrations haven't subsided, and that should probably worry you if you enjoy the killer, because you've seen what happens when a killer with an extremely bad reputation lingers in the community crosshairs too long. And let's not forget here, Merchant drew that much ire from the community despite never going above a 2% pick rate. Kaneki topped out at 29%, and is still comfortably the most played killer in the game over a month after his release. If that pick rate stays high even after Springtrap drops and the complaints about him don't die down, I shudder to think what Behaviour are going to have to do to him to quiet the mob again. But that same popularity means that if they do touch him too heavily or plan a rework, it's not going to just be a few obsessive maniacs like the Skull Merchant fanbase who are going to be upset. Half the killer player base is going to come gunning for them. So unless the survivor players cool down on Kaneki, I fear he's going to be a problem going forwards. I mean, he definitely already has been the survivor community's public enemy number 1 since he dropped, and showed little signs of surrendering that crown. So with all that in mind, you might be wondering why I didn't put Kaneki at the bottom of my list for the year. But the chapter did a lot of things that I can seriously respect. It pushed the boundaries for what a DBD killer can be, and the background they can come from, the source material they can come from, and even if the end result had some problems, at least it wasn't boring. Tokyo Ghoul arrived in the middle of a hurricane of content, with the Blood Moon event, and then Aurella, and then the PAX Anniversary livestream. Not long after any of this happened, so even if you hated the new content, there was plenty more in the pipeline. None of that can be said about the chapter at the bottom of my list, and that's Castlevania. The Castlevania chapter was announced in the last Anniversary livestream almost a year ago on the dot. The chapter itself dropped in late August after a PTB at the start of the month, and Tome 21 opened with a Castlevania Rift and Tome stories in September. A rift that didn't close until January the 28th, when Tome 22 dropped alongside the Freddy rework. This meant the shadow of Castlevania was hanging over D&D and Tomb Raider before it was released, as well as Doomed Course afterwards thanks to the Castlevania-themed Lights Out and Castlevania Rift that remained open over Behavior's Christmas break. More than anything else, Year 9 was the year of Castlevania. I don't know if anybody else feels this, but don't you think it overstayed its welcome a bit? I went into Castlevania with an open mind. It's the least familiar I'd been with any licensed chapter except maybe Alan Wake, and technically it was a good adaptation of Castlevania. The model is gorgeous, the music and voice work was great, the looming castle over every original map was a nice compromise for not getting a proper map, but everything else was just so empty. The power is painfully generic, with the shape-shifting novelty kind of wearing off a little bit when you realise you're just playing a power crap version of 3 different killers at once, and that you should just be in wolf form for most of the game anyway. I'm sure technically it was a challenge to make a proper stance-shifting killer, and again, technically it's smooth as silk, but the end result is just so devoid of sauce. The perks are a similar story. None of the perks on either side are particularly interesting or powerful, with the arguable exception of Human Greed, but if you want mixed range aura reading relating to items in the trial, we literally just got that but cooler in the last chapter. But I wouldn't be anywhere near as harsh on the chapter if it didn't define so much of the last year. If you weren't a big Castlevania fan, then Tome 21, the longest tome of the year, basically felt devoid of interesting content, and it meant that the high saturation that new killers get when they come out was prolonged because Dracula was in the Rift challenges. That popularity didn't last, by the way. Once the Rift changed over, his pick rate dropped like a stone, to the point that 2 of the killers he wound up power creeping now have higher pick rates than he does on Nightlight. It just supports my point that DBD community got bored of Dracula and Castlevania out of sheer overexposure, even if they didn't realise it. The worst sin any release can have isn't being bad, it's being boring. And unless you were a major franchise fan, Castlevania was a masterclass in boring very quickly. The power is only strong in that it's just a redux of 3 strong killers mashed into one. The perks are defined only by how forgettable they are, and the whole thing lasted way too long. So by the time the Freddy rework dropped, we were all sick to bastard death of Castlevania. It will likely get a steady trickle of content over the next few years, much like Silent Hill got, and is still getting. I'm sure Blighted Dracula will look great when Konami's lead executives fancy a nice Christmas bonus, but I'm just glad it was followed up by Doomed Course to give me something interesting again. So with the year's chapters out of the way, let's move on before the Tokyo Ghoul and Castlevania fans find out where I live, and talk about something great that happened this year. Well, 2 somethings great, I think, that kind of belong under the same umbrella. Dead by Daylight's history of reworks has been hit and miss in the past couple of years. I don't think you need me to remind you of the absolute horrors of the Twins rework that was always inflicted on the Fog if Behavior hadn't made a historic backtrack from the PTB. And if you don't remember that, then I am jealous for you. You can watch my video on it. But this year we've gotten not just 1, but 2 fantastic reworks to characters who direly needed some love. And I'm talking, of course, about the Knight and Freddy reworks. The Freddy rework has been in the pipeline for so long it had basically become a long-standing community meme. Everyone had pretty much universally accepted that it was either never coming or would be crap when it got here. But everyone's favourite American Nightmare finally got his facelift in January, and dear God was it good. Dream palettes, which were well liked as a concept but before were ultimately impotent in practice, became genuinely impactful and really fun to use. The Dream Snare getting replaced with a mid-range projectile effectively brought back the manual sleep mechanic from original Freddy, since you could now put survivors to sleep remotely when you find them. And the Dream World in general is more threatening than it used to be with its increased lethality and potential to teleport to healing survivors in the Dream World. Freddy went from a killer who was painful to play to a really fun new iteration of the character who's decently well balanced and has a versatile enough power to work with a huge variety of perks and builds. Between Doomed Course in December and the Freddy rework in January, the Christmas to New Year period was hands down the best part of the year, at least in my opinion. But long before that, we had the first great rework of the year, all the way back in June 2024. Because this time last year, I didn't at all think I'd be feeling this positive about the Knight. Knight's rework had a difficult task. His skill floor at the time was very low, and his power kind of encouraged the worst parts about playing Dead by Daylight. He was exceptional at holding 3 gens and shitter guard zoning, but couldn't really do anything else. He had a skill ceiling, but actually getting to it often wasn't really worth the effort. So most players just played at the skill floor and coasted by. But the Knight rework changed that monumentally. It raised his skill floor, it made him more skill expressive to play and play against, and it gave him room for some serious increases in power. But I'm not a Knight player. I'm not really great at talking about this sort of thing, so I thought I'd get somebody who is. zmpixie? Sorry, American moment. zmpixie? Yeah, that doesn't feel right. Either way, Pixie is a Knight streamer, one of the best you'll find out there. She is Taras Korvach's canon wife, according to creator-director Dave Richard.
To officialize, to marry Pixie and the Knight. And yes, it is in my power to do this.
And she's a good friend of mine, so I thought I would talk to her and see what she had to say about the Knight rework, because I'm sure she'll have better insights on this than I will.
Thank you, Pixelbus, for the proper introduction. But hi, yes, I'm Pixie. So in July of last year, they gave the Knight a really, really good quality of life change. They gave him Map of the Realm base kit, they gave him Pillage Mead base kit, they reduced his camera when you summoned their guards to help with clunkiness, they swapped the Carnifex and Jailer hunt times, they added an additional hunt time and banner spawn time multiplier for the longer path you create, and they removed the set rotation so you could choose a guard. Like, you didn't have just Carnifex, Assassin, Jailer, and a set rotation. You had your choice to send whichever one you wanted out. And they also got rid of shitty guard, which just means you just poop out a guard and then, yeah, they added a 10 meter limit. And they added a decay system, which is if you were at least 8 meters close to a guard, the hunt will deplete by 300% or 3 times. So this was nice, this was great, this was cool, and then when they dropped the release out of nowhere, they gave him like a global cooldown, which means instead of having your guards have a separate cooldown, you could summon whichever other one you want while the other one's on cooldown. After you use one, you can't use another one for 10 seconds. It was really bad. It was really, really, really bad. Like, you are just punished for using your power. Like, yay, I summon a guard and they're done with everything they need to do for a maximum of maybe 20 seconds, and then, oh no, I can't use my power for another 10 seconds. Yay, I break a pallet, yay, I can't use my power. I can't follow up after I just used my Carnifex to send a different guard to where I need to pressure myself, because my whole entire power was on cooldown for 10 seconds. It was so fun. And then on top of that, it just encouraged guard spam. All you did was just spam your favorite guard, like, hey, I liked my big one, so I'm gonna just use this one to break every single pallet and chase. Or, hey, I like the fast one, so I'm just gonna spam the fastest one over and over again so that I can get my downs faster. And then, oh, I like the one with the big circle, so I spam big circle and I always get hunts. But oh no, my big circle boy is really slow, so I'm not gonna get anybody. It was so bad. Every single night that I went against, they just spammed Carnifex, or they spammed Assassin, or they spammed Jailer. It was so awful. But then they fixed it, and he's fine now. Now you could just summon your guard whenever you want, and then they all have separate cooldowns, which is Carnifex 20 seconds, Assassin 30 seconds, and Jailer 25 seconds. It's fine now. We don't need to touch him anymore, except maybe, change Jailer's Chimes, because Jailer Chimes sucks. Hashtag get rid of Jailer's Chimes and give us back Lightweight Greaves, please. Smile. Okay, thank you for listening to me, bye-bye.
I suspect as the years go on, we'll be looking back at Freddy and Knight's rework as some of the best reworks you've ever had in DBD history, and a shining example of what behaviours, live design and balance teams are capable of at their best. But it's pretty safe to say those teams aren't always at their optimum. I'd say a lot of the decisions made with regard to DBD balancing this year have been pushing in a kind of scary direction that indicate a lack of nuance in the development process. Perhaps the term heavy-handed might be appropriate. 2025 has been characterised by lots and lots of sweeping changes, both to DBD's core systems and tons of characters and perks, and I would describe behaviour's attitude during this time as move fast and break things. It's better to throw a ton of stuff out and fix anything that goes wrong as a consequence than play super conservatively like they used to do and grind progress on key issues to a halt. And I'm inclined to agree, when they actually fix the problems this philosophy causes, and behaviour hasn't been particularly good at doing that this year. The most obvious example here is the haste and hinder adjustments that were slated to come in this mid-chapter. On paper, not allowing haste and hinder to stack is a good idea, but on the PTB it was done way too heavy-handedly, with only a few perks appropriately getting compensated, and none of the killers negatively affected by the change getting buffed up to compensate either. The measured thing to do would be to ship out more compensation buffs, or maybe make haste from base mechanics or killer powers able to stack with other sources of haste or hinder, and just prevent perks from stacking with other perks. But no, behaviour massively overcorrected, discarding the changes while shipping even more buffs, and now we have BT Babysitter and Unbound Singularity, bending people over backwards, which was the entire problem that removing haste stacking was meant to solve, but, even worse now. It was a massive overcorrection that came as the result of another massive overcorrection, and this wasn't the only time this has happened, just the most recent. Who can forget 70-second hook stages with zero compensation for Trapper and Hag, killers who were already struggling, and who live and die by time efficiency of playing around a hooked survivor? Don't worry, Singularity got turbo buffed, who's mostly just a power crept version of Trapper and Hag anyway, who just got given auto-aim as well so a toddler with no arms could play him. You'll buff him so he can handle 70-second hook stages, but the actual C and D tiers who get smoked by this change got nothing to help them deal with it. What about Knotted Rope? The Houndmaster add-on that was too strong, so you blasted it in the face in an overzealous over-nerf, and promised you'd rework it, but didn't, even though you went back to her and changed her base kit since then. On the PTB, you weren't planning on compensating the hindered and haste killers when you removed haste and hindered stacking, so I guess the Clown and Merchant players should go fuck themselves if they decide to try that change again. Even with the Deep Wound change, you compensated Legion by buffing every single number in their entire kit, but where are the compensations for the other Deep Wound killers? Slinger and Merchant didn't get shit. There were tons of poorly thought through perk buffs, and while some like Thrill of the Hunt and We're Gonna Live Forever got partially dialed back fairly quickly, Background Player was busted for most of the year, and remains obnoxiously strong even after the nerf it got. I know this sounds like a bit of a laundry list of grievances, and to be fair, it is, but I think it illustrates my point fairly well, that 2025 is a year of big systemic changes, but it caused a lot of grating points, simply because behaviour didn't consider a lot of the knock-on effects from those changes, and that just kind of made the DBD experience this year a lot worse than it needed to be, even as the quality of life and game health changes made the game smoother on paper. Oh, and there is one other overcorrection that really stung this year, more than any other to me personally, but don't worry, we'll have plenty of time to talk about that later. There's been one other consequence of this move fast and break things attitude by behaviour this year, and it's one that really hasn't been helped by the shift to Unreal Engine 5 at the beginning of the year. Year 9 has been one of DBD's buggiest years to date, up there in my opinion with Year 5. Every update this year has been characterised by some sort of major bug in the game that seemingly has come out of nowhere, and has damaged the quality of matches for huge numbers of players. That's actually why I didn't acknowledge Doomed Course's bugs as a reason to keep the chapter out of the top spot, because every single chapter and mid-chapter this year has had bad bugs, every single patch. But the difference being that Doomed Course's bug mostly affected the killer herself, whereas the bugs from the other chapters spilled over and fucked the wider game as a whole. Kaneki dropped with the balanced landing bug that created infinites on half the maps in the game. Freddy's Rework dropped with the Huntress Hatchet bug that mutated into multiple separate game-breaking twins bugs, one of which is still here by the way. 2v8 tiles were spawning in regular matches, meaning people were escaping the maps on Autohaven. Deathslinger's Chain broke every time anybody M1'd in 2v8. Forgotten Ruins being added caused people to start clipping through the floor. For a little bit, any survivor leaving the game caused a random gen to get completed. And adding Orella to the game has bugged out half the killers in DBD at time of writing. As soon as one absurd bug got fixed, another one would invariably crop up, and judging by Steady Pulse hitting the game like a truck full of landmines, this is likely to get worse before it gets better. During some of the worst periods where DBD was bugged to fuck, I wound up following Matthew Cote's advice and played something else. I got back into Warhammer 40k this year, I played a lot more Overwatch, I got into Marvel Rivals, and Emma Frost started draining on our productivity like a cunty 650 HP vampire. But one of those games that ate up my time was one of Behavior's own products. It didn't get much fanfare, and I'm not sure many people played it, but regardless, it shed a new light on the world of the entity from the perspective of the people living in its shadow, and combined its own distinctive style and innovations with plenty of homages to the game we all know and love. I'm talking, of course, about What the Fog, baby! Let's go! Yay! What the Fog! I love What... No, I don't love What the Fog. Actually, I'm talking about Supermassive Games' The Casting of Frank Stone. One of my favourite things to come out of Dead by Daylight this year. And we've got a rascal down here. He's just paying a visit. There we go. There he is. Hello. Say hello to YouTube, you creature with a tiny brain. Yes, hello. You're very good. Very much a fusspot. Sorry about that. Let me get something straight here. This game was not perfect, and this game was not made for everyone. But for people like me who love DBD's universe and lore, the casting of Frank Stone was just what the Doctor ordered. It introduced some fun characters like Linda Carter, Sam Green, and the multidimensional mastermind herself, Augustine Lieber, and showed her pruning first a killer and then the entire world for the entity's consumption. It built out the world of the entity and the Black Veil cult that worships it in a super satisfying way, and set up Frank Stone, the champion, as a killer in the entity's service to arrive in DBD in the future. We're in a period now where DBD is groaning with licensed chapters, and that's the kind of thing that drives a lot of new player attention. But that comes at the cost of effective storytelling in DBD's own universe, and the casting of Frank Stone marked the biggest expansion of the lore in Year 9, and one of the biggest we've seen ever. And it laid the groundwork for what could really have been an exciting hybrid of original and licensed storytelling. What could have been. I'm going to go on a little aside here because, well, I don't really consider it part of DBD Year 10, because it hasn't happened yet. I do still want to talk about the recent announcement concerning Frank Stone at the Behaviour livestream at PAX this year, because it really, really sucks, and will probably wind up on my worst of the year for Year 10, so, yeah, let's just play it.
So last year, Supermassive Games released The Casting of Frank Stone, which explored the origins of a brand new killer. This year, Frank Stone in his transformed state will be entering the entity's trials as a cool new legendary outfit for the Trapper.
This announcement effectively just shot down any prospect of Frank Stone coming to DBD as his own killer. And as such, the idea of a casting of Frank Stone chapter is now basically dead. In short, I hate this. Frank Stone was a celebration of DBD's lore and original storytelling, and to hear that it's never going to be a chapter after it was so clearly built up to be one, just doesn't sit right with me. And yes, I know the game didn't do well, but that's not necessarily an indictment of Frank Stone as a killer, because the character himself was probably the best bit about the game. As a lot of critics pointed out, the biggest issue with casting of Frank Stone was it being a Supermassive game, with all the traditional Supermassive flaws of poor performance, limited choices, and a lot of unlikable side characters. But none of that precludes the champion from being a great killer addition to the roster. At some point, the licensed gravy train will stop. You will have to go back to making more original chapters again. And writing off such an easy win, an original character who already has their own game and lore and design and sounds and Mori already done for you. That's such an easy win that you're just throwing away on a legendary skin for the worst character in the game. What a bloody waste. Maybe Behaviour will say something about it in the weeks and months to come. Be serious, Max. Maybe Behaviour will say something about it in the weeks and months to come. The news of Frank Stone not being his own killer was definitely the most controversial part of the PAX livestream, and a lot of people were upset to hear it, even if they didn't play the game itself. There is talk of trying to pressure Behaviour into walking the decision back, and while I don't think that's necessarily likely, I'm at least hoping we can make enough noise that Behaviour might address it. But yeah, the casting of Frank Stone was definitely a divisive game. It wasn't what you'd call popular, but the people who liked it really liked it, and often got super invested in it. And part of that, I think, was a result of something that's been a constant source of frustration for me and a lot of people like me over the past year. And that's license fatigue and its knock-on effects on Dead by Daylight's lore and storytelling. It is without question that the large amount of licensed content this year compared to original stuff has been beneficial to the growth of the game. The devs at PAX imply that Tokyo Ghoul is one of the best performing chapters in history, but this stuff definitely comes at a cost. If you're not interested in Tokyo Ghoul or D&D or Castlevania as properties, these licensed chapters offer very little to you, especially if the powers don't vibe with you either. At the very least, an original chapter that doesn't really work for you can still expand DBD's world in other ways. It can get a tone with interesting new story stuff or tie in with characters that you do like to enhance their story, basically as a side effect. I don't like Sable very much, but I can at least appreciate the way that she ties in with characters that I do like, with Aurella and Michaela. Licensed chapters just don't do that most of the time. A watered-down DBD's own world and IP by turning DBD into an exhibition of other people's creations instead of a celebration of its own. The term Fortnitification has been bandied around a lot lately, and in this case, with twice as much licensed content as original stuff this year, and that same record looking to persist through year 10, I don't think it's entirely wrong to use it here. This licensed overdose has been extra draining because in this period the tomes have also been getting worse. The switch to a skins first rather than stories first model for the tomes has resulted in DBD's lore becoming more shallow and disappointing over the course of the last year, and a bit longer than that if I'm honest. And in the case of the newest Rift, it has no lore at all. There isn't really a Tome 23 to begin with. Between the terminal overdose of licenses and the gradual decay in importance and quality of the tomes, DBD's lore has never felt less important. And to somebody who cares as much about DBD lore as I do, that's just kind of awful. I recently made a video on this topic if you want to hear my thoughts on it in more detail, so take a look if you're interested. Of course, it would be far easier to appreciate the new licensed releases if the powers we got for them felt fresh, fun, and engaging, which they were, if you like dash killers. Because every killer this year has been another dash killer, aside from Vecna, I guess, who has a dash but isn't really a dash killer in the same way the others are. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the Dashslop age, and depending on your perspective, that can be a good or a bad thing. If you're someone who likes dash killers, then the Dashslop Era might be exactly what you're looking for. Kaneki especially has shown that the demand for these kinds of killers is clearly significant, and I do not entirely blame behaviour for this design direction. This playstyle is well liked for sure, it makes strong killers consistently, and in Dracula and Kaneki's cases then the dashes do make sense, for an authentic adaptation of the licensed character as well. But it's also impossible to deny that if you're not a fan of dash killers this year, it's just not been great for you, especially coming off the back of Chucky's release and the gigabuffing of Billy that made him one of the best killers in the game last year. We've had as many dash killers in year 9 as we've had trap killers ever, and even if you do like these types of killers, I'm sure you can appreciate when enough is enough. Especially when Kaneki dropping has proven that being a dash killer is no guarantee of being fun to play against, even if it does make them fun for people to play. I'm not even trying to say that these killers are like awful designs or anything. I really do like Houndmaster personally, again, highlight of the year. But that doesn't mean that I can't acknowledge she's part of a homogenizing trend. Max, would you mind? But that doesn't mean I can't acknowledge that she's part of a homogenizing trend that's slowly strangling killer diversity. And I'm very much hoping that next year lets us push the boats out and have some proper respite from the age of Dashslop. But this brings me to an awkward... He's still down there, look at him. Look at him. Look at this absolute madman, he's so stupid. I love him, I love Max so much. But this brings me to an awkward juncture. I'm gonna keep it. But this brings me to an awkward juncture. And if you're a long-time viewer, it's probably the kind of thing you expected when you clicked on this video. Because this year has been a real mixed bag of quality. There's been some great things like Houndmaster, the quality of life and game health improvements, and the Freddy and Night reworks, alongside the bad stuff, like license fatigue, lore disintegration, and the egregious bugs. But if I can be honest with you, when I first think of Dead by Daylight Year 9, I don't think of any of these things. One thing has overshadowed the entire year for me, or at least most of it. And more than anything else this year, it's put me off playing this game too much, or at least playing very much Killer. I know some people at Behaviour watch my videos, and if you've gotten this far, then, you know, props to you, but what the fuck are you guys doing with Skull Merchant? Yeah, you all probably knew this was coming, but most of Year 9 has just had this dark shadow over it. It's made me want to play DBD much less than I used to, because shooting my favourite killer right between the eyes, and then refusing to actually fix her, has not been the best incentive for me to keep playing your game. Let's not even forget the horrific precedent that the Great Nerfening has set for the future. Anyone else remember this roadmap here where Pinhead and Plague were scheduled for changes? I remember it well, because I remember Pinhead and Plague players shitting themselves because survivors complained about Merchant and she got turned into a wet stain on the floor. But survivors complained about Plague and especially Pinhead, so were those killers living on borrowed time as well? We had players dreading the possibility of their killer getting changed, and breathing a sigh of relief when they got taken off the change list. And now you're seeing people demanding that Nurse, or Blight, or Kaneki get the Merchant treatment next, and just get their legs blown off because they don't like playing against the character. In 8.3.0, you opened Pandora's box, and just like the myth, you can't close it again once you open it. I can't believe I have to say this, but when your balance changes are so destructive and catastrophic that you've made players of every other killer terrified at the prospect of changing their character, you've made a bit of a mistake. But the nerfs aren't really my biggest problem in and of themselves. Things get nerfed all the time, and in a normal situation I wouldn't be bothered too much because I still have fun with the character, and Behaviour would normally buff a struggling killer back up after a chronic and spectacular over-nerf like the one Merchant got. Look at Hillbilly with Overheat, for example. He got over-nerfed and was left that way for quite some time, but eventually he got buffed back up to be better than ever. But that's not going to happen here, because the rework attempt, and I do mean attempt, has put this on ice, and that's the real problem here. The complete shit show, that is the two proposed design previews, just make me sad, because I can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the killer into a state where the same people who turn up for the endless stream of Dashslop every 3 months don't complain about her too much if her power is allowed to be decent. There is so much wrong with this approach, not least because it's not going to work. Their current design previews have shown a consistent inability to consider the practicalities of what they're proposing, but beyond how shoddy their attempt at reworking Skull Merchant have been, the knowledge that the Sword of Damocles is coming down on my favourite killer is just kind of miserable. My favourite thing about actually playing Dead by Daylight has been rendered almost completely unusable by these incredibly overzealous nerfs, and will be kept in this atrocious state until you have time to render her down into a fine soup. That's been the story of Year 9 for me, so it doesn't matter what good stuff you add, what positive polish you put on the game, or whether other people get changes or killers that they like, because my favourite way of playing this game has been intentionally crippled in preparation for the chopping block. I love Dead by Daylight, even if I don't always sound like I do. But it's becoming really hard to want to sit down for an evening after a day of writing or filming or editing and just play the game I talk about for a living. I moved into my new flat specifically so I could start streaming again. Why do you think that hasn't happened yet? That's not burnout. It's not the result of playing too much. That's my way of playing the game being actively destroyed, and taking a break isn't going to fix that. If I do that, I can't use my platform to try and make things better, to get my voice heard. My only option is to make as much noise as I can, and try and set the rework on the right track, derail it if I have to, because if I don't, my favourite killer is gone forever. Do you know how stressful that is? Do you understand how much harassment I get for it? When the first design preview dropped, I had to get banned as a topic on the OK Buddy Daylight subreddit because I got so many memes made about me. That's a nasty position to be put in when all I was doing was trying to ensure my favourite killer still exists a year from now. That's a shitty position to find myself in, but short of saying nothing and letting you roll over Skull Merchant like a tank, I don't have a choice. I have never had a choice. If you want to know what my Year 9 has been, that about sums it up. Because between the tomes dying on the vine, the decrease in importance of DBD's original lore, and the wholesale destruction of my favourite killer, my experience with this game is just getting worse and worse. And the more I use my platform to push back against it, the worse my relationship with this game and its community becomes. That just leaves one important question. Why do I even bother anymore? If my relationship with this game is so bad now, why don't I just give up? Well, there's a reason for that, and it relates to the last thing I want to talk about in today's video. Something Behaviour has gotten monumentally better at this year, and that's communication. Both in terms of communicating well with the player base and handling feedback well, so that communication becomes a two-way conversation. Let's not forget here that for every catastrophic cock-up from Behaviour this year, they've averted another one through continuous and clear communication with the players. Xenomorph almost got skull merchanted on the PTB, and the Behaviour of a year or two ago would have shipped it anyway. But the community spoke up and Behaviour took action to sort that issue out. Stuff like individual guard cooldown, the Save That Night rework. The community chromatic contest broadening to include more entries so the same characters don't just win every time. Constant player retention and feedback surveys from the community managers. Yes, I did destroy one of those surveys, but in my defense it had it coming. And even little things like returning good chromatic descriptions and raising the blood point cap during the Blood Moon event and keeping it raised afterwards. These are the kind of things that show us that the devs do care what we think and do try to listen, even if they don't always get it right. That is why I remain invested. That's why I make the videos that I do, talking about the things that I talk about, and sometimes taking controversial stances that get me yelled at, because on some level, these guys do care and do listen. Year 9 has made the game better in a lot of ways for a lot of people, but it also sucked in just as many ways for me and those in the community who share my priorities, my fellow lore whores and iPad babies, trap droners and Frank Stoners. But Behaviour has shown their earnest commitment to making the game better, and I'm living in hope that Year 10 brings those improvements to the areas of the game that I enjoy, and that all the frustration and exhaustion of Year 9 will be worth it in the end. Hey everyone, sorry for making this video even bloody longer. This wasn't expected. I'm currently making a celebratory post-video barbecue. But there's just been a forum post from Ryan B, the community manager behind the Merchant rework, who's basically come out and said they're taking it back to the workshop. We don't know how long it's going to be before we get our third design preview, but we're going to get one at some point. And they're going to, they said, reconsider what does and doesn't work about the design, which to me sounds a bit like we're losing the drone propulsion system. So yeah, we're actually being listened to. The Merchant rework is probably going to take even longer, but it's looking good. But yeah, that does prove my point that their communication's been getting better and they've been taking feedback more aggressively. This is everything I was talking about in the video, put into action. You know what? Maybe I've got more than just finishing a video to celebrate, because maybe Year 10's going to be pretty good after all.